Hi y'all! Today I'm going to show you how to make my gluten-free apple cider donuts. These donuts are so soft and tender, cake donuts. They're full of apple flavor from both reduced apple cider and apple butter. They're perfect for those cozy fall mornings, so let's get started and I'll show you how to make them. I'm pouring 2.5 cups or 600 milliliters of apple cider into a small saucepan, and I'll start it off boiling and reduce it down to a half a cup or 120 milliliters. This will take about 30 to 40 minutes. Allow that to cool to room temperature before continuing. So I'm going to combine all my dry ingredients into one bowl, and this is 3.5 cups or 490 grams of my all-purpose flour blend. And to that, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, and a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. And this is 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and 1/4 teaspoon of ground allspice. And I'll just whisk this all together until it's fully combined and set that aside. Okay, we'll get on with our wet ingredients, combining those. So in a large measuring cup, I'm adding our cooled down reduced cider, which like I said is a half a cup or 120 milliliters, along with 3/4 cup or 180 milliliters of buttermilk, which is what makes these donuts so darn tender. And this is a half a cup or 120 grams of apple butter. Definitely make sure to use apple butter versus apple sauce. But if you can't for some reason find apple butter, I think you can actually make it by reducing applesauce either on the stovetop or like roasting it in the oven. Don't take my word for it though. Check Google because I could be totally wrong on that. And finally, this is 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. We'll just give this a little whisk and set this aside. All right, in a large bowl, we'll start whisking our eggs with our sugars. This is 2 eggs that are at room temperature. It's really important to have all of your ingredients at room temperature so they will combine well together and homogenize. And to the eggs, we're adding a half a cup or 100 grams of granulated sugar and a 1/4 cup or 50 grams of light brown sugar. Whisk this together for just a few minutes until it's lighter in color and a little lighter in texture as well. So now I'm going to slowly drizzle in my melted butter. This is 4 tablespoons or 56 grams of butter that's been melted and cooled to room temperature. You want to make sure you're whisking the whole time so the mixture becomes kind of emulsified. Okay, so now we'll just alternate adding our dry with our wet ingredients, just like when you make some cake recipes. I'm starting with 1/3 of my dry, and I'm just whisking that in until almost completely incorporated. And then I'll add in half of my wet and do the same thing. Then another dry, and another wet, and finally end with the rest of the dry. And now I'm going to switch to a spatula because the dough or batter is very thick. This is a really loose batter / dough, which creates the best, softest donuts. You need it to be this texture or you will end up with a really dense, tough donut. Okay, first things first, we're going to plop this out onto a sheet of heavily floured parchment paper. And when I say heavily floured, I mean, I know some of you are confused about that. I always use the same flour that's in the recipe to flour my bench or board or whatever surface I'm using. So this is, I used Kim's all-purpose gluten-free flour blend, so I'm adding Kim's all-purpose gluten-free flour blend to the parchment. I'm kind of going to spread out this dough a little bit when I scoop it out, just to make it easier to get into a flatter shape, just to give myself like a little head start. And I'll heavily flour the top as well, because I'm going to actually brush off most of this flour anyway, and it will help it from sticking so much. So now I'll put another sheet of parchment on top, and because this is such a soft dough, I'm going to gently take my rolling pin and almost kind of scoot the dough out and push it out further instead of roll it, or just very, very gently roll it. Okay, we'll slide this right onto a baking sheet, and I'm going to stick it in the freezer for 10 to 15 minutes, or until it's firm enough to handle and stamp out some donuts. So I have parchment squares here, and I'm going to line a baking sheet with them. That'll be where the donuts go once they're cut out. And now I've got my cinnamon sugar mixture, which is just 1 cup or 200 grams of granulated sugar and 1 tablespoon of cinnamon. And I've whisked this together in a shallow bowl for dredging the donuts when they come out of the fryer. Okay, it's been 15 minutes. So we'll remove our dough from the freezer and slide it right off the baking sheet. And now we can remove the top sheet of parchment. It's still pretty sticky, and that's just the nature of this dough, so I really want to make sure I'm working quickly with this. If I were to add more flour to the dough, it would just make the donuts really tough and dense, and we want a light cake donut, not a dense, tough donut. So I'm just using the pastry brush to brush off some of this excess flour on top. And I'm actually using one of my biscuit cutters versus a donut cutter, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. I do have donut cutters, but for these donuts, with the dough being so soft, it's best to stamp out the circles first. So I've dipped this in flour, and I'll just press it and turn and lift up, and I'm going to carefully transfer each one of these circles to a parchment square. Now that they're on the parchment squares, I can go ahead and stamp out the middle. That's why I waited. It's so much easier to transfer the whole circle versus the donut shape. It gets kind of elongated, and because it is so sticky, it kind of messes up and it doesn't end up looking like a donut towards the end. So this, what I'm using, is a piece from an old donut cutter I had, which it was like a removable piece. And this is perfect, of course, but you can also use a small round cutter that's about 1 inch in diameter, or the wide part of a large decorating tip. Make sure you dip it in flour though, because this is so darn sticky. And you can also fry off the donut holes if you want, or you can re-roll them and get more donuts. I prefer more donuts to the donut holes, but do what you want to do. So I've got my temp set at about 325 to 330 degrees Fahrenheit. It looks ready, so we'll gently put our donuts into the hot oil, parchment squares and all. That's what makes it so easy to transfer these donuts. And then I'll just take some tongs, and I'm going to carefully slide the parchment square out from under the donuts. Sometimes it takes a little wiggling. And I'll just pull that out completely, and those will go into the trash. And then we'll let these donuts fry on this side for about 2 minutes total, maybe 3 minutes. And then I like to use a chopstick to flip them over and get them out of the oil as well. I know a ton of you are going to ask me if these can be baked, and while I'm sure they can be by piping the dough into a donut pan, true donuts just aren't baked. Have you ever got a baked donut, like your pre-gluten-free days, at a donut shop? I don't think they ever had baked donuts, do you? I mean, maybe now they do, but In my opinion, it's more of just a cake in the shape of a donut or a muffin in the shape of a donut and not a true donut unless it's fried. I know some of y'all just don't like to fry, and I get that, but my channel and my blog is all about recreating those foods we used to be able to eat, and I sure don't remember eating baked donuts. Do you? I don't know. Maybe you did back in the day, but I remember going to certain places that would have cake donuts, and I specifically remember going to some fall fair or something and getting apple cider donuts, and they were killer. So I know they were not baked, they were fried. They should be this nice and dark mahogany color. So if they look like this, you're on track because they have the cider and the apple butter and all those warm spices in there. So they'll naturally be darker than a normal yeast donut would. I'm going to let them drain on a wire rack for just about a minute or so while I get the rest of the donuts into the oil. All right, now we can dredge these in the cinnamon sugar mixture while they're still warm. You definitely want to do this while they're warm. If you wait too long, the coating will not stick because it has that little bit of oil left on the outside, and that's enough to allow this coating to stick. So make sure you get all parts of the donut coated in this cinnamon sugar mixture. And that's all there is to it, guys. It's super easy to make these. They're so flavorful. They have a nice crunch on the outside, not even just from the cinnamon sugar, but the crunch from the frying in the oil. And then you get into that warm center, and it's so tender and just soft and real flavorful. It has that nice apple flavor that I think is coming through more so because of the apple butter added to the dough. These are just delicious, you guys. Enjoy.